It's good to see you this morning. If you have your puzzle pieces to our members, make sure to not give those to me till after, because I want you to have them during the sermon. But I will be taking those up after, and then I'll be writing down the names of everyone who turns one in. But no, I'm just kidding. I know that there's going to be many absent pieces. That's why I bought 2 puzzles to start off, because I knew I'd never get all the pieces back. This morning we're going to do something a little bit different than what we've done before, and we're going to go back through the way we kicked off the year, and we're going to kind of examine how our year went, looking at kind of our goals for what we set, the first sermon of the year. And so if the handout looks similar, it's because it's kind of a review of where we've been, and it's for you to take some extra notes on how you've done on these things. And on top of that, though, we also have several now here who were not here at the beginning of the year. And so they weren't here to kick off the year with the theme and all these things. And so with that in mind, we'll kind of get to leave them with the challenge that we tried to focus on for the year, and also that we want to keep focusing on throughout just our lives as Christians. So that's what we're going to look at this morning. Tonight, I hope you'll come back because we're going to continue and try to wrap up our series on the home by looking at a lesson that is maybe not typically talked about when you think of the home, and that is, what about singleness? What about someone who is not married or doesn't get married? Sometimes we talk so much about the husband-wife relationship that those who aren't married are just kind of sitting there twiddling their thumbs and would like some kind of lesson for them as well. And so that's what we're going to look at tonight, Lord willing. And then, Lord willing, next Sunday morning, we will kick off a theme for 2026. And we will kind of give some new challenges, and I'll kind of explain that next week. So that's the kind of layout for today. If you've not gotten a handout for the sermon this morning, please go ahead and grab one so you can make some notes for you, because no one can really determine how you've done this year accurately except for yourself. And so that's why we kind of want to spend some time on that. Now, we've been talking a lot about providence, and we're kind of going to try to wrap that up this morning. And kind of end the year with these thoughts on providence and salvation. And that's kind of our last lesson. We talked some about it last week, and we've tried to wrap our mind around providence as best as we can, but it's one of those things that it's hard to fully understand, and that's okay. We don't have to fully understand. The things that we have to fully understand, God has made simple, thankfully. And Paul describes that when he's writing to the church at Corinth, and he describes that there is simplicity in Jesus. And we've talked about it before, but when things get very difficult and complex, a lot of times it's because man has inserted himself where only God is supposed to be. Man's will, man's thoughts, man's desires, man's layout, man's doctrine, when those things are inserted, it muddies the waters of what was meant to be clear. And then you have people that are really confused about what's right, what's wrong, and therefore, why even look into religion when there's 40,000 plus different denominations in the world? And you have people that are honestly seeking, but they're struggling to find. And that's partly because we've made it difficult to find the truth. Whether it's because there's so many different variations of some kind of truth without it being the truth, whether it's because those that have the truth are just not preaching or teaching the truth. We make it difficult. And so when we think about the topic of providence, it is a more difficult topic. There are some, you read Romans, and if you're not careful, you can almost drown in the depths of that book. You read James, and it's a book that's very surface level, not in its importance, but it's just very straightforward. It's very blunt. It's very challenging. And there's just very different kinds of books. So there are more difficult topics. But when things get very hard to understand, a lot of times it's probably because we can't fully understand it, or it's because mankind has made it difficult when God tried to make it simple. Now, we talked last week about those who honestly seek, find. And that's kind of where we ended. Honest seekers find. Another thing to consider when it comes to providence is that providence opens doors. When you consider, and last week we spent some time, we were talking about the eunuch in Acts 8. And we looked at Philip and that whole situation and God's working in it in sending Philip. And you see a man who wants to find truth. God sees that man who's seeking honestly to find truth. And so God has Philip to leave a place where things are going really well. And a lot of positive things are happening. And he has him leave that to go to this man who's seeking. A person by himself in this chariot rather than the group of people. It's kind of, in a way, if you look back to the ministry of Jesus, you see Jesus frequently do this as well. We talked about that, where he's focused on the many, but then he still takes time for the one. Not ignoring the many or forgetting the many, but to give the one some specific attention at certain times for specific reasons. Whether it's Jairus, the ruler of the synagogue, or the woman whose name we don't even know. We just know she has a health issue with blood that she's had for 12 years. And she can't get rid of it, and it won't stop. Whether it is feeding the 5,000 with loaves and fishes, or a leper, or a blind man. And so time and time again, Jesus shows us the importance of looking at the many, but also not forgetting the one. And in our service to him and in our seeking to reach people with the gospel, it's great to think about the many and to try to offer opportunities for a many kind of situation with a group of people, but we can't forget about the one-on-one conversations that happen every day where the gospel can be shared and can impact lives. And so we see that eunuch searching and seeking in Acts 8. We see Philip, and then when he's presented with the opportunity, he runs to the chariot. And he doesn't wait, like we said last week, for it to get to him, but he runs to it. And for us, if we're not careful, a lot of times our style of evangelism might be more of a waiting than a going. And all I mean is, it is very important for us to invite people to come and be here. But the church is not meant to be confined to one singular location and never move. Meaning, evangelism is not just, and service to the community is not just opening up our doors and sticking our head out the door, or even standing on the porch holding the door open and saying, hey, we're right here, come over here. But evangelism and helping the community actually is that combined with a going into the community and to find those who are honestly seeking truth, to help them come to know that truth. And so there is an aspect of invitation, but evangelism itself is not just invitation. There's got to be a teaching of truth of the gospel. And so part of evangelism is, hey, you need to come to our meeting, or you need to come to VBS, or you need to come to this particular thing. Hey, we're having a homecoming or a friends and family day, or whatever it is. Part of evangelism is an invitation. Another part is the conversation, and it is going, right? The Great Commission, it's interesting that the first word is a little two-letter word that we use all the time, G-O, go. Now, I say that's the first word. That's the first word in our English language as we translate it into our words and our language, is the word go. This command, not a suggestion, not a, hey, if you would like to, it'd be nice, but a command to go. And so we have that obligation. Philip went. He could have waited. They were kind of close to one another. It's not like he had to travel, I don't think, many days. But the part of that you kind of see providence is a man honestly seeking, a man who can help him find truth, are close enough together that their paths are about to cross. And so God sends Philip. Philip goes. He runs to the chariot when he's told to overtake the chariot. He goes to that chariot and he asks an important question. Do you understand what you're reading? Now, that's a dangerous question in our culture. Why? Because in a sensitive time, people's response might be, what do you mean do I understand? Hey, I graduated. I went to college. I understand. And they feel like their intelligence is insulted. I would say that maybe those aren't honest truth seekers if that's a quick response, right? If that is our natural response, is to be on the defensive and argumentative. But with the eunuch, we don't see that. We see a question that reminds us, again, of our responsibility in this situation of the honest truth seekers. How can I unless someone teach me or show me? There's a lot of people who are honestly seeking. There's people who are reading. They're studying. They're trying to get it. But they need someone to help. Not because they're not smart. Not because they are unintelligent and can't understand words and language and can't read. It's not that. But they need help in coming to know the truth. And part of that is because they've heard so many different variations of what people call truth. And they don't know what the real truth is. And so they need someone who knows the real truth to help them see the real truth. And when you know the real truth, it's easy to spot the frauds, the fraudulent truths, right? It's hard to defend the truth if you don't know the truth. It's hard to point out error if you don't know the truth. And so all that's kind of combined. So we see that with Philip and the eunuch. Now, another thing that I think kind of connects with that is when you think of salvation and our call to go into the world and teach people the gospel, preach the good news of Jesus, providence opens doors. It opens doors for God's people to have those opportunities, to take advantage of them, to help people come to know truth. Paul spoke of open doors of opportunity. Go to 1 Corinthians 16. In 1 Corinthians 16, he tells the Corinthian church of his plans of spending a considerable amount of time in Ephesus and working for that time in Ephesus. In verse 9, he says, "For a great and effective door has opened to me, and there are many adversaries." Notice that adversaries to Paul did not deter him from walking through the door. Adversity on the other side of the door did not keep him from trusting God and going through the door. You know, and I said Ephesus. If you go back up to verse 8, Paul says, "But I will tarry in Ephesus until Pentecost." And he says that. Why is he going to do that? Because of that great and effective door. Now remember, with Ephesus, you've got the temple of Diana, of Artemis there. And so he's going to come in and preach about God and these, not having false idols and all these other things. And in that, you have people whose livelihood's going to be greatly affected by the teaching and preaching of Paul. Because the way they make their living for several of these people is these merchants in the shops and on the streets that come out there and they've got all of these replicas and all these little things built of that temple, of that goddess, of that false god. And so if people start to believe what Paul's preaching and teaching, what are they going to stop buying? Those false gods, those false little idols, those things that these other people are kind of depending on to make their living, to take care of their families and to live their life. And so they want to rise up against Paul, and they do, to try to get him to stop and all these kinds of things. So Paul, that's what he's walking into, and he knows it. It's hard for us at times to walk through doors that are open to us. Would you agree? Sometimes it's hard for us to walk through a door because we don't know what's waiting on the other side. We're nervous about what might be there. We're scared, potentially, fearful. And so we hesitate to walk through the door. Maybe we're afraid that our comfortable will get uncomfortable. Maybe we're afraid that we're going to have to change some things that maybe we don't want to change. Or we're going to have to sacrifice some time that we'd rather put towards something different, something else. And so a door's opened. We don't really know what's on the other side. We're scared to walk through it. Paul has a door open for him. He knows what's on the other side, and it's going to be adversity. And he walks through it anyways. Ask yourself if you were in a situation where you know a door has been opened. And you also know that if you walk through it, you're going to have adversity. You're going to have difficulty. Would you walk through it? Do you think that your faith is at a point right now where you believe, yeah, I'd walk through it? That's what Paul does here. He mentions this door. Now, what's interesting is Paul did not say, I have opened a door. But he says, a door was opened for me, which means it was opened by somebody else. Now, in this case, undoubtedly, that somebody else is God. Providence worked toward the conversion of some in Ephesus whose will it was to do God's will. They wanted to do what was right. An open door, however, as we see with Paul's wording, doesn't mean the absence of obstacles or opposition. When Paul and Barnabas returned to Antioch after completing their first missionary journey, they reported to the church. And if you go to Acts 14 for a moment, we'll see this report. Verse 27, Acts 14. Says, now, verse 27, now when they had come and gathered the church together, they reported all that God had done with them, and that He had opened the door of faith to the Gentiles. So they stayed there a long time with the disciples. They had great success on their first missionary journey. This door of faith was open to the Gentiles. There was great success, a lot of excitement, good things going on. The first missionary journey, establishing churches, appointing elders on the island of Cyprus and in Antioch of Pisidia, Iconium, Lystra, and Derbe. They attributed their success to God opening the door. That's providence. As one who sought to preach in large metropolitan centers where no apostle had gone, it's not surprising that Paul had his heart set on preaching in Rome. Romans 1:15. Now, later in his epistle to the Romans, he says that he had been laboring from Jerusalem and all the way around to Illyricum. I think that's how you say it. Illyricum. And he was doing that, preaching the gospel where other apostles and preachers had not been. This is the reason why I've been so often been hindered from coming to you, Paul explains towards the end of Romans in Romans 15. He had been hindered by his personal decision to work elsewhere first. Providence opens doors, but it doesn't dictate or coerce. It's up to us to walk through doors. Now, what do you think, if we were to kind of examine for a little bit here, what are some reasons that we don't walk through doors? I kind of gave some and talked about it, but why do you think when God opens doors, sometimes we reach out and shut them? Or we just walk past them and act like they're not there? Okay, so we doubt ourselves. We're afraid of our own inadequacy. Can you think of anybody in Scripture that struggled with that? A door was opened, they doubted themselves, And so they were nervous and scared to walk through the door. I'm going to give you a hint. It starts with M and ends with Oses. Moses, that's right. Exodus 3. Moses is called by God at the burning bush. And in that call, his first excuse is, but who am I? And in that, you see insight into a man who is struggling with insecurity and inadequacy. And part of that insecurity and inadequacy is not just, I'm little old Moses, even though that's part of it, I guess you could say, yeah. But it's also, he's struggling with that, and with that feeling of insecurity and inadequacy, partly due to his past. What he had done concerning the Egyptian in killing that man. And then the response from his own people. When he thought he'd be received, and they were like, "Oh, are you going to kill us too?" And so he runs away from all that for a number of years and struggles with that. And so when God calls him, he still hasn't let go of what he had done. I think that's part of his struggle with walking through the door. The door open to Moses is leading God's people out of Egyptian bondage. And Moses says, but who am I to do it? And then God reminds Moses of who God is. And then Moses says, well, what do I tell them? And God tells him what to tell them. And Moses says, well, what if they don't believe me? And God gives him some things to do, these miraculous things to do that would be signs to show, or I guess you could say more signs, because they were showing in that situation that he's really coming from God. These kind of, the hand putting in his cloak, it comes out and becomes leprous, put it back in, it comes out, it's clean. The rod thrown down as a serpent, pick it up, it's a rod again, things like that. So what if they don't believe me? Well, God gives Moses these things to do that can prove he's being sent by God. He says, but I don't talk well. And if you think about it, part of that is some think maybe he had a speech impediment of some sort, whatever that might be. And God kind of says he says to Moses, who made man's mouth? And then after that, we're in chapter 4 now, by the way, in Exodus, and after that excuse, finally Moses, you can almost see him throw his hands up and be like, no, this is working. Just send somebody else. And so you see a man who is really wrestling with insecurity and inadequacy. Part of it is his past. Part of it is his struggle with speaking. And so we doubt ourselves. God opens a door, and we look at the door, and we think, well, that's surely meant for somebody else. I can't do this. I can't go through that door. I don't think God would open a door for you to walk through if he didn't think you could do it, because it doesn't rely on your ability. It relies on your faith and trust in him. Because all of us are inadequate, right? None of us deserve what God's done for us. None of us can do this on our own. In fact, the verse that Paul says that is so quoted, but at times very misquoted, is, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. That's a great verse, Philippians 4:13, but it's not about you and it's not about me. Philippians 4:13 is not about what I can do, even though that's where we put the emphasis. The emphasis is all on Jesus. Paul says there, I can do all things through Christ. That's the emphasis. We read the verse and we emphasize the beginning. I can do all things. That's not the focus. I can do all things through Christ. That's the emboldening, because he's the one that gives me strength. He's the one who helps me. I'm inadequate. You're inadequate, but not with God. And Moses struggles with that. We struggle with that. We don't think that we are good speakers. We don't think that we know enough. We don't know what to tell people. We don't think that people will even listen to us if we try. We think, well, I don't have the time right now. God, just send somebody else to do it. And we end up just like Moses. And then at the same time, we're like Moses, and God's given us all these rebuttals, all these answers to our questions, to our doubting. Instead of trusting at that point like Moses does, at times we shift over to Jonah. And we don't run from God because we know we can't. We know God is omnipresent. He's everywhere. We know he's omniscient. He knows everything. So we can't run from God. Jonah knew he couldn't run from God. That's not what the book's about. That's not what Jonah was trying to do. He was trying to run far enough away where God had to use somebody else. He did not want to be used by God. And so when our excuses run out and we feel like we've ran through them all and God's given us answers through them all and it seems the door is still right there, what we try to do is try to get as far away from the door as we think we can. Tarshish to them at the time was as far away as you could get from where they were. And that's where he was trying to go. As far away as he could. That's what Jonah was trying to do. He wasn't running from God. He was running from the mission of God. He wasn't saying no. He was saying no, but in a way of saying, you aren't going to use me. Funny enough, God uses Jonah. And by the way, the only time he's happy in the entire book is when God does something to benefit him. When Jonah, God raises that plant to come up and it gives him some shade, Jonah smiles and he's happy. And then God takes it away. That's the only time he's happy. And it's sad because as he sits on the hill, he's not sitting there resting thinking about, man, I was just swallowed by a fish a little bit ago. He's sitting on a hill looking out over Nineveh, hoping that they don't repent so he can watch it burn. That's why he goes out there. And he's upset when they repent and God spares them like God said he would do. And so you look through Moses and Jonah and you can almost see a cycle sometimes for people trying to follow God, people who are Christians, where we have all these reasons why we shouldn't walk through the door. And that silly door is still right there and I don't want to go through it. I'm going to run this way. And so we doubt ourselves. And like Moses, we're so busy telling God about who we are and how we're not good enough that we don't hear what God says about who he is and how it doesn't matter whether we're good enough. It matters whether we trust in the one who is. Good answer. Other reasons why we don't walk through a door, insecurity, inadequacy. That's a good one. Okay, so sometimes it's because we think we figured it out ourselves. And so we're not really looking for the door God's given to us. We're just going the path we've chosen. And the path we've chosen keeps us so busy that if we're not careful, we don't even see the door God's given us. We think, like going back to the inadequacy part, that's surely meant for somebody else. I've got my own way figured out. And that goes back to the other part of providence where those who honestly seek find. Honest seekers will find. There are people seeking, but maybe they're not really seeking God. They're just doing their own thing and trusting in themselves. When we trust in ourselves, we will let ourselves down every time. There might be fleeting moments of happiness, but that's what they are. They're just fleeting. It's not real joy. Joy can sustain when happiness goes away. And when we think we got it all figured out, we trust our doors better than we trust God's. And so we don't walk through his. Another good answer. Anybody else? Why else don't we walk through doors of opportunity? Yeah, last time we trusted and walked through the door, experience wasn't so good. And so we're hesitant, right? When we've had a bad experience, that lingers with us. And it creates hesitation and fear. You know, in 2023, December of 23, so 2 years ago, we were coming back. We had gone to see the Christmas lights in Soddy Daisy, which we'll never go to again because of this night. But we had gone, Lauren's family was in town for Liam and Ella's birthday and for Christmas. We had gone to try to go to Rock City, and we got there like 2 minutes late, and because the group had already gone down, they would not let us go down. Our dinner plate, went to this burger place, and they took forever. But Rock City would not let us go. They were like, yeah, they just went down. So we're like, so they're right there? Yeah. Can't you send somebody down? No, our only other guide's down there with them. So there was no way we could, I'm talking like 2 to 3, 4 minutes late. So we also won't go back to that burger place. But anyways, since that fell through, we're like, well, we could stop it was in Chattanooga. We were stopping in Soddy Daisy and look at lights. So we did that. Coming back through, sure enough, Lauren's kids had to go to the bathroom. And so we stopped in Dunlap, where my family is, and went to my mom and dad's for just a second so they could use the restroom, get back on the road. And as we're coming up back towards McMinnville, there's a bar on the right, and it's called Green's Tavern, or Green's Tavern, I think's the name of it. And as we're coming up, a vehicle pulls out, and I see them, but they start to slow down. And so I think they're going to stop in that middle lane. There's like 4 lanes of traffic, right? So I think they're going to stop in that middle lane. They just kept going right through. Never stopped. Turns out the guy had a floor mat nailed to the door of his vehicle on the passenger side, so he couldn't even see out that side of his car. He also tried to go into that building and flush some stuff down the toilet. But it totaled our van. We hit his vehicle, hit the side of that building, put a hole in the side of that building, missed the gas line by like that. And that's not an exaggeration. It was literally about this far from our vehicle. So, all that happens. Liam and Ella are in the car. Me and Lauren are in the car. Lauren's middle sister and brother-in-law are in the very back of the van. And van's totaled. We have some scratches, and that's it. To this day, 2 years later, every time I'm driving, it happened yesterday. Every time I'm driving, when I see a car start out, I start to get nervous. Every time. And I start to put the brakes on. I wasn't speeding. I had it on cruise control going up that way. So I know I wasn't speeding. And I tried to put on the brake, but there was no way to avoid it. And so now to this day, because of that experience, I get nervous, scared, I hesitate, I tense up every time a car starts to come across. Even when I see them slow down and stop, there's part of me that just doubts it. Now, I know that's not connected to evangelism and walking through doors God opens, but in a way it is, in the sense of when we have bad experiences that can leave a scar, that were difficult, that hurt, it results in us being scared any time a similar situation arises that might be a similar door. And so we're scared to walk through it because the last time was so bad. That last relationship, when I tried to talk to them about Jesus, that person that I loved and cared about, we haven't spoken in 5 years. And so we think that every time we talk to someone else about Jesus, that might be the result, and we don't talk about him. And there's other examples of that, of why an experience might be bad. But when we have a bad experience, it also kind of might push us to trust in ourselves, because we're going to do our best not to lead ourselves, at least we think we will, back to that kind of experience. And so we put more trust in ourselves to direct the path than God. Great answers. Anybody else want to offer anything why we don't walk through doors that providence, that God has opened for us to walk through? And maybe any other answers we give might connect back to these three, of thinking we know better than God, of feeling inadequate, or of having a bad experience, Because when you feel inadequate, when you have a bad experience, fear, that's a big one that might keep us, fear paralyzes us, and it keeps us from moving and doing and living. And when we're terrified to walk through the door because we don't know what's on the other side, that uncertainty, that's where, again, that trust and faith in God comes into play. Not every day is guaranteed. And we've learned to live as if it is. And so we expect tomorrow. We expect next week. We expect a few weeks. Lauren and I, our 10-year anniversary, yes, she's put up with me for 10 years, is January the 16th. And we're going to, for our 10-year, we were trying to think of what we could do. And I've been on one cruise in my entire life. We're going on another one. And so we're leaving on January the 11th. I'll preach that morning, and we got to head to Orlando that night. And then we'll be gone that week for our 10-year anniversary. So pray for us, cruise. Anyways, I don't even know where I was going with this now, but I just keep thinking about, being blessed that she put up with me for 10 years. But when you think about, going back, doors open, because I lost my train of thought. Doors open to us, trusting in God, fear of uncertainty. Like I said, the unexpected, that's what I was talking about. The expecting tomorrow. We've got plans. My point of that was we expect to do that. And so we've gotten to a point where we expect all these things, and any uncertainty is scary. But every day there's uncertainty. It's about trusting God and learning to trust Him in the uncertainty, and knowing that no matter the outcome here, we know what the ultimate outcome is going to be for the faithful. And so we trust Him, and we walk through a door, knowing that even though we are inadequate, even though we do have a past, God can still use us. In fact, when you read through the Bible, the only perfect person was Jesus. Every other person God used was imperfect. Noah was a drunk. Moses had a speech impediment, and he killed somebody. David committed adultery with a woman, had her husband killed. I mean, you go through the list. Peter denied Jesus, yet he was used by God. Paul held the coats of those that stoned Stephen, and then went about trying to rip apart and tear apart God's people. Yet God used him too. Everybody, Abraham stretched the truth a few times. Anybody you can think of that God used was imperfect, except Jesus. And so if you are imperfect, great. You're exactly who God likes to use. And so your imperfectness is not an excuse to not serve the one who makes you complete through the blood of His Son. When God opens doors, trust Him more than you doubt yourself. And He can use you. Whether that is use you to lift up someone who's greatly discouraged and hurting, whether that's use you to help someone come to know the truth about salvation, not all these other distorted things, but the truth of what God says, not man, about everyone's soul and about how someone is added to the church, not by a group of people voting them in and determining what, but by God adding them when they are baptized for remission of their sins. Acts 2, 40 through 47, 38 through 47. And so when doors are opened, what an opportunity for us to serve the one who saved us. In fact, Isaiah 43:7 tells us our purpose. You were created, and I was created for the glory of God. I am here to live a life that would honor and glorify my Creator. And that's why you're here. That's our purpose. Ecclesiastes' words, it is to fear God and keep His commandments. This is man's all. And so live out that purpose. Trust in Him more than you doubt yourself. Walk through the doors God opens. And you can help those who don't know Jesus come to know Jesus. And who knows, where would Peter be without Andrew bringing him to Jesus? You might not have the personality of Peter, but you don't have to change the kingdom, to help the kingdom grow. You don't have to have his personality. You can be Andrew and be a powerful evangelist for the Lord. Comments? Brother Steve? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. When we're trying to honestly help and we get that combative answer, that's hard to deal with. And, you know, those difficult moments are opportunities for growth and for learning. There might be a time where we could have handled the situation better, where we could have said something differently, with a better tone, better attitude, with more love and concern. Or there are times where maybe we should have been sterner in what we said to make sure it was clear what we were trying to say. We can't grow and mature and learn those things except the moments when we don't do it right or when we mess up, right? But we learn from that, we grow from that. We can't make anyone change. And as we reflect back, if someone gives a combative answer, if someone rejects the gospel, if someone, chooses to ignore and live and stay in the world, if we can look back and say, I know that I came to them with pure intentions and with love in my heart, I know that I tried to show them what the Scripture said, then you also can know you did what God has called you to do. He didn't call you to make people change, but He did call you to give them a chance. And that's all we can do. And then the moments when we have the negative and the combative and all that, reflect back and see if you could have done something better or different. And if so, do that next time. There's still more people that need to come to know the truth. And maybe that person was hard soil. Maybe it was the wayward. And you tried. But just because we come across wayward doesn't mean we need to neglect giving the good soil the seed. Thank you all for being... Oh, go ahead. Yeah. Yeah.